Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into one of those books that just never gets old, The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli. It's a book that forces you to think differently about power, leadership, even human nature itself.
It's a book that stirred up controversy for centuries, and it's still sparking debate even today.
Exactly. And that's why we're here today, to really dissect it, to understand why it's had such a lasting impact.
We'll be looking directly at the text of The Prince, of course, but also considering the historical context. What was Italy like when Machiavelli was writing? What were his own experiences that shaped his worldview?
Right, because he wasn't just some armchair philosopher. He was deeply involved in Florentine politics. So his ideas are rooted in real-world experience.
Exactly. He served as a diplomat, saw firsthand how the game of power was played, and Italy at the time was incredibly fragmented, all these competing city-states constantly jockeying for position.
It sounds like a pressure cooker.
Right.
So how did that shape Machiavelli's thinking?
Well, he was a pragmatist, driven by a desire to see Italy unified and strong. He wasn't interested in idealized theories of government. He wanted to understand what actually worked, what allowed rulers to gain and maintain power in the real world.
So less about should and more about is, dealing with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be.
Exactly.
And he was pretty blunt about it too, right? Not one to shy away from the more ruthless aspects of leadership.
Definitely not. In The Prince, he throws out the traditional rule book. He's not concerned with moralizing. He's focused on what it takes to be an effective ruler, even if that means making tough, sometimes unsavory choices.
It's almost like a political survival guide, but with some pretty intense tactics thrown in.
You could say that. Now, to really grasp Machiavelli's thinking, we need to start with his view of human nature.
Right, because he had a pretty unique perspective on that.
He believed that people are fundamentally self-interested, driven by ambition, a desire for power, and prone to deceit if it serves their needs.
So not the most optimistic view of humanity.
Perhaps not. But he saw this as the starting point for understanding politics. If you assume people are naturally going to act in their own self-interest, then it changes how you approach leadership. You can't be naive or idealistic.
Right, you can't just assume everyone is going to play by the rules. You have to be ready for anything.
Exactly.
And that leads us to another big theme in The Prince, the role of fortune.
Yes, Machiavelli has this striking image. He portrays fortune as a woman, a force to be reckoned with, but one that can be seduced, controlled, even dominated.
I've heard that phrase before. Fortune favors the bold. Is that kind of what he's getting at?
In a way, yes. Machiavelli believed that while fortune plays a significant role in human affairs, it's not an all-powerful, uncontrollable force.
So we're not just puppets of fate. We have some agency, some ability to shape our own destiny.
Precisely. But it takes a certain kind of skill, a certain kind of mindset.
And what is that exactly?
That's where virtue comes in. Now, this isn't virtue in the traditional sense of moral goodness. Machiavelli's virtue is about effectiveness. It's a combination of skill, cunning, boldness, decisiveness.
So it's more about having the right tools for the job, the ability to adapt, to overcome challenges.
Exactly. It's the toolbox a ruler uses to navigate the unpredictable currents of fortune.
And sometimes those tools might be a little sharp. I mean, Machiavelli wasn't afraid to talk about using deception, even force, when necessary.
That's right. He presents us with this dilemma, the tension between what's morally right and what's politically effective.
It's like he's saying, sometimes you have to make tough choices. Choices that might not fit neatly into our conventional ideas of good and bad.
Exactly. And that's what makes The Prince so challenging. It forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about power and leadership.
And to think about the trade-offs that might be involved. Okay, so we've got Machiavelli, a man who's seen the dark underbelly of politics, who has a somewhat cynical view of human nature, and who believes that a ruler needs this virtue to wrestle with the forces of fortune.
You've got it.
So how does all of this translate into practical advice for rulers? What are some of the specific things he recommends in The Prince?
Well, he covers a lot of ground, but some of the key themes include the importance of securing power, building a strong, loyal army, balancing the need to be feared and loved, and even the strategic use of deception.
It's like he's laying out the rules of the game, so to speak. But it's a game with pretty high stakes.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm guessing not everyone agreed with Machiavelli's ideas. Were there other thinkers at the time who pushed back against his views?
Oh, definitely. There were those who found his ideas shocking, even dangerous. And their perspectives are important to consider as well.
Right, because it's all about getting a well-rounded picture.
Yeah.
Understanding the different sides of the debate
Exactly. One of the most interesting contrasting figures is Francesco Guicciardini. He was a contemporary of Machiavelli, and while they shared some common ground, they also had some significant differences of opinion.
Okay, I'm really curious to hear more about Guicciardini's perspective and how it clashes with Machiavelli's, because it's through these contrasts that we can really start to grapple with the complexities of the prince.
Absolutely. So let's dive into Guicciardini's views and see how they challenge us to think differently about the ideas we've been discussing.
Sounds good to me.
So one of the most striking differences between Machiavelli and Guicciardini is their view of Cesare Borgia.
Ah, Cesare Borgia, the Duke Valentino, a figure shrouded in legend, right?
Exactly. Machiavelli uses Borgia as a prime example of virtu in action. He admires Borgia's ruthlessness, his cunning, his ability to seize opportunities and consolidate power.
But Borgia was also known for being incredibly ambitious, even cruel. So how does Guicciardini reconcile that with his own, perhaps more cautious, view of leadership?
Well, Guicciardini sees Borgia's ambition as his downfall. He argues that Borgia's quest for power ultimately led to his ruin. He was too reckless, too willing to take risks, and he alienated too many people along the way.
So it's like Guicciardini is offering a counter-narrative, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition.
Precisely. He's reminding us that even the most skilled and cunning rulers can fall prey to their own flaws.
It's a good reminder that there are always multiple perspectives on these historical figures, and that what might look like virtue to one person can look like recklessness to another.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of considering different viewpoints, not just taking one interpretation as gospel.
Absolutely. Now, another thing that Machiavelli really emphasizes in The Prince is the importance of a ruler having their own strong, loyal army.
Yes, he's very clear about that. He warns against relying on mercenaries or auxiliary troops.
Because their loyalty can't be guaranteed, right?
Exactly. They're fighting for pay, not for a cause, so they're more likely to switch sides if a better offer comes along.
And that can be disastrous for a ruler who's trying to maintain power.
Absolutely. Machiavelli uses historical examples to illustrate this point. He talks about how rulers who depended on mercenaries often found themselves vulnerable when those mercenaries decided to turn against them.
So for Machiavelli, a strong, independent army is like the bedrock of a stable state.
Precisely. It's the foundation upon which a ruler can build their power.
Now, this might seem a bit archaic to us today. We don't live in a world of constantly warring city-states anymore.
True, but the principle still applies. In the modern world, army might take on different forms. It could be economic power, technological prowess, or even soft power.
So it's about having the resources and the ability to defend your interests, to protect yourself from external threats,
Exactly.
and to be able to act independently when necessary.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of a strong army. But what about the relationship between a ruler and their people? How does Machiavelli see that dynamic?
Well, that's one of the most controversial aspects of The Prince. Machiavelli's views on this are quite different from what we might consider traditional.
I've heard that he famously said, it's better for a ruler to be feared than loved.
That's right. He argues that fear is a more reliable basis for power than love.
Because love is fickle, it can fade.
Exactly. Whereas fear is more enduring, more constant.
But doesn't ruling through fear create resentment? Won't people eventually rebel against a leader they're terrified of?
It's certainly a risk, and Machiavelli acknowledges that a ruler shouldn't be hated.
So it's about finding that delicate balance, inspiring fear but not outright terror,
Precisely. It's about being feared but also respected.
which sounds pretty tricky to pull off.
It is. It requires a great deal of skill and judgment.
So what are some of the ways a ruler can cultivate that balance?
Well, Machiavelli offers a number of suggestions. He talks about the importance of being decisive, of punishing transgressions swiftly, but also of being just and fair. He stresses the importance of avoiding unnecessary cruelty.
So it's about being strategic with fear, using it as a tool, but not letting it become the defining feature of your rule.
Exactly.
And of course, Machiavelli also talks a lot about the importance of appearances. Even if a ruler isn't inherently virtuous, they need to project an image of virtue.
Absolutely. Perception is often more important than reality in politics. A ruler needs to cultivate the right image, even if their actions don't always align with that image.
So it's like, fake it till you make it, but on a grand scale.
You could say that.
It's all about stagecraft, about creating the right impression.
Precisely.
Now, we've been talking a lot about Machiavelli's view of leadership, but I'm curious to hear more about how Guicciardini differed from him on this.
Yeah,
Especially when it comes to their contrasting assessments of Cesare Borgia.
right. Well, as we discussed earlier, Guicciardini saw Borgia's ambition as his fatal flaw. He believed that Borgia's relentless pursuit of power led to his downfall.
And Machiavelli, of course, saw Borgia as a model of virtue.
Exactly.
So how do we reconcile these two very different perspectives?
Well, I think it comes down to the fact that they were looking at the same events through different lenses. Machiavelli was more interested in the mechanics of power, in what it takes to acquire and maintain power, whereas Guicciardini was more attuned to the moral implications of power, to the potential consequences of unchecked ambition.
So it's like they were both trying to understand the same puzzle,
Hmm.
but they were focusing on different pieces of it.
Exactly.
And I think that's what makes studying political thought so fascinating. It's about grappling with these different perspectives, these different interpretations, and trying to form our own conclusions based on the evidence.
Absolutely.
And Machiavelli, even with his often provocative and controversial ideas, forces us to do just that.
He challenges us to think critically about power,
Okay.
about leadership, about the choices that rulers face, and ultimately about the kind of world we want to live in.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to human nature
Yeah.
and forcing us to confront both its potential and its darker side. So as we wrap up our deep dive into The Prince, what are some of the key takeaways you think listeners should keep in mind?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important to remember that Machiavelli was writing in a specific historical context. Renaissance Italy was a very different world from our own, so we have to be careful about applying his ideas directly to modern politics.
Right, it's not a one-to-one translation,
Yeah.
but there are still some timeless insights to be gleaned from his work.
Absolutely. I think one of the most important is his emphasis on the role of fortune. He reminds us that events are often unpredictable, that we can't control everything.
But that doesn't mean we're powerless.
Exactly. Through skillful action, through virtu, we can influence the course of events, we can mitigate the impact of misfortune, and we can seize opportunities when they arise.
So it's about being adaptable, being prepared for the unexpected.
Precisely.
And I think another key takeaway is Machiavelli's focus on the importance of power.
He doesn't shy away from the fact that power is essential in politics. It's what allows rulers to achieve their goals, to maintain order, to defend their state.
But power can also be corrupting, right?
Absolutely. And that's why Machiavelli stresses the need for balance, the need for a ruler to be both feared and loved, to be strong, but also just,
It's a tightrope walk,
it is.
and it requires a great deal of skill and judgment.
Yeah.
So what's the final message you want to leave listeners with?
I think it's this. Machiavelli's The Prince is a challenging and thought-provoking work. It's not a simple how-to guide for aspiring tyrants. It's a nuanced exploration of the complexities of power and leadership. And it's a book that continues to resonate with readers centuries after it was written.
It makes you think differently about the world, about the nature of human beings, and about the choices we make, both big and small.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Machiavelli. It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has indeed.
And we hope it sparks some new ideas and insights for our listeners. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those Machiavellian wheels turning